Take a look at this little piece of cardboard. It's just one part of the high-selling media franchise in human history about children enslaving animals and making them fight each other until they pass out. And it's not an accident that Pokémon was born in Japan. This is the country that produces 60% of the world's animated shows and is the birthplace of the most iconic video game characters in history. It is easily one of the most creative countries in the world, but have you ever wondered why a country with just 1.5% of the world's population seems to produce so much creativity? We usually think creativity comes from thinking outside the box, but what if one of the real reasons is thinking inside the box? So on today's episode, I will explain what makes Japan so creative and what lessons you can learn to apply to your own creative process. To understand the Japanese mind, you first have to look at a Japanese map. The country is actually 70% mountains. That means 125 million people, about a third of the US population, are squeezed into a livable area the size of Kentucky, making the major cities like Tokyo incredibly dense. And when you pack that many people that close together, ideas start bumping into each other. Let's start with Pokémon. Before it was a billion-dollar empire, the story begins with its founder, Satoshi Tajiri. As a kid, Tajiri grew up in a part of Tokyo that was at the time still fairly rural, and he was obsessed with collecting insects, so much so that his classmates actually called him Dr. Bug. But as Tokyo rapidly expanded, forests and fields were paved over by the growing city. Years later, instead of insects, Tajiri found himself surrounded by a much weirder species: people. Redirecting his obsession to video games, Tajiri started a gaming magazine called Game Freak, which he sold in local stores. Because dozens of these gaming stores were crammed into the same few streets, the magazine spread quickly through a tight-knit community of gamers. That's how it ended up in the hands of the talented artist named Ken Sugimori. Sugimori didn't just read the magazine, he was so inspired by Tajiri's vision that he reached out to offer his own illustrations. One day, Tajiri noticed two kids playing Game Boys together, linked by a cable. Watching data move between the two screens, he imagined his childhood insect crawling from one system to the other. That image became the core idea behind Pokémon: collecting creatures, trading them, and completing the set through connection with other people. And his friend Sugimori would become his lifelong creative partner, the co-founder of the actual game studio and the lead artist who drew all of the original 151 Pokémon. Without dense cities, shared spaces, and constant physical proximity, that idea might have never formed. So here's the first practical takeaway: find your density. Don't create in a vacuum. If you're a musician, a writer, or a YouTuber, place yourself where other creators already are. Share a space. Join a co-working office, a local meetup, a writer's room, or a hackathon, and build a scene if one doesn't already exist. If your city doesn't have a hub, create a digital one. Start a Discord or a small community where people can share each other's work. Now, we usually think of creativity as thinking outside the box, breaking rules, and having infinite choices. But in Japan, the most iconic inventions come from thinking inside the box. This was the philosophy of Gunpei Yokoi, the legendary designer of the Game Boy and the producer of Metroid. Gunpei lived by a core principle called lateral thinking with withered technology. But essentially, it means using cheaper technology and relying on creativity to do the heavy lifting. Take the Game Boy, for example. When it launched in 1989, it was technically worse than its rivals. It had a tiny black and white screen, while competitors were releasing full-color handhelds. But because it was limited, it was also affordable, indestructible, and the battery lasted several times longer than anything else on the market. In fact, the Game Boy eventually sold 118 million units, outlasting every single one of its high-tech rivals. These walls of the box forced Nintendo to focus on what actually mattered: perfect gameplay and iconic characters. And this mindset wasn't just about hardware. Yokoi passed this thinking down to his young protege, Shigeru Miyamoto, the man who would go on to create Mario, Donkey Kong, and The Legend of Zelda, who applied it directly to character design. For example, when Miyamoto first created Mario back in 1981, he was limited to a tiny digital box of just 16 by 16 pixels. He didn't have the resolution to draw a realistic face or the memory to animate flowing hair, so he used his constraints as a paintbrush. He couldn't draw a mouth, so he gave Mario a mustache. He couldn't animate hair, so he used a cap. And to make Mario's arm movements visible against his body, he used high contrast overalls. Mario didn't become an icon despite these limits, he became one because of them. I actually first came across the idea of using constraints as an advantage in the book The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. As he puts it, whether imposed by design or by necessity, it's helpful to see limitations as opportunities. By working inside the box, you stop worrying about what to use and start focusing on how to use what you already have. So here is the second practical takeaway. Use your walls. Stop worrying for a bigger budget or better gear. If you're a creator, your limitations can be your greatest competitive advantage. If you're a musician, try writing a song using only 10 tracks. If you're a YouTuber, don't worry about an expensive camera. Your limitations will force you to improve your storytelling to compensate. When you take away the easy options, your brain starts looking for the mustache, which could become your signature style. By the way, if you liked this video so far, please consider liking and subscribing. I call this the David Macy Exchange. If you like and subscribe, I'll promise to make more content like this. Now in the West, we love the idea of the eureka moment, the genius who wakes up with a $1 billion idea. But in Japan, they know that the spark is only 1% of the process. The other 99% is Kaizen. Literally translated, Kaizen means change for the better, but we know it today as continuous improvement. The modern version of this idea actually began after the Second World War. As Japan was rebuilding its industrial base, they brought in American manufacturing experts to help modernize production. But what made Japan different is what happened next. They turned improvement into a habit. And this idea was popularized by Toyota on the factory floor. Instead of trying to create a masterpiece in one giant leap, Toyota workers were encouraged to find tiny 1% improvements in their processes every single day. Over the decades, those invisible daily habits compounded, transforming the company into the largest automaker in the world. But Kaizen isn't just a corporate strategy for building cars. When a single artist or creator takes that exact same mindset, working towards the 1% improvement every day, they achieve a level of mastery. They become what the Japanese call a shokunin. Shokunin is the craftsman's mindset. Pride, responsibility, and lifelong refinement, no matter how humble the work. You see the spirit most clearly in Studio Ghibli, creator of some of the most beloved animated films of all time, and the art style AI loves to copy. If you've ever watched a Ghibli film, you've probably noticed the backgrounds. They are famous for being incredibly beautiful. Hayao Miyazaki, Ghibli's co-founder, is famous for personally redrawing scenes again and again until they felt right. In Spirited Away, there's a scene where Chihiro rides a train across a flooded landscape. Nothing happens and there's no dialogue, but that one scene, which took a very long time to animate, is incredibly beautiful. That's Kaizen in art, treating the small stuff like it matters, because when you stack enough small stuff, you get something unforgettable. So the last practical takeaway is this: fall in love with the process. If you want to create at a higher level, pour care into what you do and let the small improvements stack up. This is where you apply the 1% rule. Instead of the pressure to be perfect overnight, focus on being just slightly better today than you were yesterday, whether it's your writing, your music, your videos, or any other craft or hobby that you care about. So that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe and let me know what you think in the comments down below. And I think you'll also enjoy my other video. Thanks so much for watching. Peace.